kind of like normal jobs are slowly going away.
Yeah, again, that's another thing, is that the current work week, I'm in massive, we already had a massive disruption due to COVID, people working online, fewer hours from home. And so much, it's made me realize, even though I wasn't working like a 9 to 5 job at the time, so much of what was coming out, that the 9 to 5 job, working culture, it's so outdated and so pointless and futile and contributing to so much for our current mental health crisis. It's in desperate need of reform, and we can do it because studies have shown that productivity remains the same even if you're working on a 4-day week with reduced hours, because people just don't have the sort of attention span you need.
So that's something that the Green Party is advocating for you?
No, again, this is where it's important to say, maybe they will. Maybe at the next general election with the manifesto, there are people in the Green Party who favour reforming the work week. But I'm not going to go on record and say that is an absolute statement they're wanting to make.
I see. Because I think, especially nowadays, we've seen with how Corbyn, how he dramatically lost in 2019. I fear it was a big responsibly because it was just too dramatic, too radical. And that's the kind of vibe I get whenever I think of the Green Party, or like spending 200 billion, 300 billion on just climate change related stuff. Well, there's poverty, there's all sorts. Obviously, they come hand in hand, especially as climate change affects people from poor backgrounds even more so than richer backgrounds. But at the same time, it's kind of, in the public perception view, Green Party does have that kind of outsider, very radical kind of view.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And that is, to some extent, a fair criticism. Why are we spending money on these, chlorophyll lovers when there are people starving in the streets? And that's a fair point. There's a couple of things I'd like to say with regards to that. Firstly, you quote number 300 million, is that right?
It's around 200 billion to 300 billion.
The problem is, at a certain point, once you get past a certain number, the actual amount of money you're talking about doesn't matter because you have no frame of reference. Like, is 300 million a lot? Is it enough? Like, how much percentage of GDP is that? It's like when the Conservatives say we're investing record numbers in mental health services, and they quote a high number. That means nothing because you just do not have a frame of reference. You don't know if that's enough. The specific number doesn't even really matter because you can quote as big a number as you like, but if it's not enough, then it's rubbish. But it still sounds good enough to communicate what they're saying.
So is it enough?
So for 300 million for
300 billion. Sorry.
300 billion. Oh, billion for. And again, they're not talking about paying all that up front. It's split across a number of years, but it's just again. I'm an economic student, so I should be able to answer this. 300 billion to save the environment. When a Green Party member would say, if we spend that much money on defence, on the NHS, then this is just as if not more important. It deserves this level of funding. And again, it's not so. Don't want to say blank check because that reinforces a negative impression. But it's important enough, and it really is important enough. We should be spending a lot of money on it. And it's worth noting that this is the left-wing part of me speaking, but the money is there. It sounds like a scary amount of money, and it should do. But if you look at the government's policy during COVID, where they effectively borrowed as much money as they needed to get through it, and now they turn around and say there's no money left, it's a little galling, I will admit.
It's a bit. I mean, we're in. Debt has finally reached 100% of GDP.
Yeah.
That's a bit scary.
Yeah, it is scary. But again, debt is an interesting one because you've heard there's been talk of the fiscal black hole they've been talking about in the government.
40 billion. Something like that.
And again, this is where the shifty part of economics comes in. A lot of economists have kind of torn them apart for that because that number is based specifically on your expectations of shrinking the national debt. And while generally speaking, shrinking debt is good, austerity measures introducing and causing the record high levels of poverty and cost of living that we've seen is even worse. Do you mind if I go off on a wee tangent slightly?
Go for it.
No. So people may not remember this, but back in 2018, Philip Alston, who was the UN Commissioner for Human Rights, I believe, did a survey of poverty and the Conservatives' policy of austerity in the UK. And what he found, he compared it to conditions in a third world country. He said that, there's a systemic problem with giving people the help they need. Universal credit is broken. It is not working.